great like gyan, and not just like bakudi gyan, but like real world experience.
You said BFF. What is BFF?
Bharat Founders Fund.
You call yourself a failed founder.
If we had a very good network and support system to guide us a certain way, our lives would look very different today.
They're, as you said, taking shit from all directions.
After that, life hits you like, I wouldn't even say one brick, it's like 1,000 bricks, all like coming from every direction. It's the hardest thing for a founder to not get constantly depressed. They know it's not all like beautiful and glam the way it looks on the outside. It's crap, it's daily firefighting.
I have a great business idea, but I will not tell it to you because you will
Steal it. Please sign an NDA. There's a lot. I'll try to keep it a little censored and not say anything politically incorrect. When we actually look back on our journeys, I think we very categorically realized that if we had a very good network and support system to guide us a certain way, our lives would look very different today. You know, we probably wouldn't be failing at our startup. I think that's the background we came from. And when we were trying to set up BFF, it was a simple ideology. Yeah. You have these new age founders. Apart from, of course, capital, etc., which is important, at that early stage, you want a lot of like operational guidance, tactics that people have done in the past, right? Which will only come from people who built themselves. So it was an idea to kind of reimagine how an angel network or syndicate should run. And we broke down the entire fundamental. Like everywhere in the world, angel networks are run the same way. If you have money, you can be a part of it. That's bullshit. Because effectively, like just because you have money doesn't mean you understand tech, doesn't mean you've done 0 to 1. You might have generational wealth, whatever, right? Everyone's life situations are so different. And that's kind of what we wanted to build for, like that knowledge transfer between experienced operators and new age founders, specifically in the Indian startup ecosystem. We're what, 8 years old at this point? It's a pretty young ecosystem, right? And it just, I think it was a good time as well, because these operators who've been building for a while, they had built large startups today and were starting to see some liquidity, and automatically they wanted to give back to the ecosystem. So like that synergy flows very well. And simple problem statement, right? Just the knowledge transfer. How do you make it operational and impactful? Because I think on both sides of the spectrum, whether it's for our partners or for new age founders, time is paucity, right? So you want to go into a conversation and within half an hour, get back with 3 experiments that you can run tactically, as opposed to reading 30 books and then trying to experiment with 3 things which are likely going to fail.
Or even having a half an hour conversation and just going round and round.
Round and round, which is typically what happens, right? First half an hour, you'll just be telling the person, oh, this is what I do. Then another 20 minutes to explain what your problem statement is. And typically you won't get away with anything actionable. So if you keep your agenda points really, really limited and focused, you can make it very constructive.
You said BFF. What is BFF?
Bharat Founders Fund.
Not best friend forever.
That's the subtle messaging behind it, and it is a very conscious acronym, by the way, because for us that was the concept. We wanted to be best friends for these new age founders and for our partners, right? Both sides. And like the whole ecosystem needs to function that way, because at an early stage, like collaboration is key.
Let's dive into your decent job. What exactly is Bharat Founders Fund?
So effectively, it's a syndicate of operators, right? And for us, it's a simple thing. It's basically anyone who has built 0 to 1, 1 to 10, and is now on that journey of like building that 10 to 100, right? And what we essentially do is utilize the knowledge and the operational tactical knowledge that these operators have kind of got to help early stage startups who are now building out. It's a very simple way of operating, man. For us, how does it make sense is we depend on these partners, these BFF partners as we call them, to be our sounding boards, right? They help us evaluate companies. Because honestly, let's be very real, I'm not the smartest person on that table, right? And we realized that very quickly. We're like, dude, these guys are too good. We are learning from them, in fact. So let them decide what is a good investment opportunity, what isn't. And wherever they decide to invest, we invest with them. For them, how we've solved things is pretty simple. We act as their back-end office, right? I'll handle closing for you. I'll manage the portfolio for you, things like that. So it doesn't eat up a lot into their time unless it's a specific problem statement that I want to help a portfolio company out with.
So there's this research, and the research suggests that founders are innately optimistic people.
Yes.
I would say that we are very optimistic, right? Me and Vishwat,
That's great. You should be.
yes, we want 30 million, 40 million subscribers. We want to be like a huge YouTube channel. Everybody watches everything, right?
I think the words Akhil is looking for is delusionally.
Delusionally optimistic. And this is like, it's research backed. It was a research conducted by Harvard. We can probably link it in the description. My question is, if founders are coming together, forming a syndicate to form a fund, who are all delusionally optimistic, whose optimism has actually gotten their company wherever it did, do you think the operating procedures actually make sense for other companies?
Surprisingly enough, you're very delusionally optimistic only probably for the first 1 or 2 years of when you're running a startup. After that, life hits you like, I wouldn't even say one brick, it's like 1,000 bricks, all like coming from every direction, right? And when you go through that for a period of about 1 or 2 years, your optimism is something that you actually have to remind yourself to keep holding on to. It's the hardest thing for a founder to not get constantly depressed because, like, I mean, you're doing 10 different experiments, right? And trust me, 9 of them are not going to work. You're lucky if that one thing works. So over time, the optimism becomes the complete opposite spectrum is what I've seen. And you actually have to hold on to that optimism, but inherently you become like a pessimist, which equates you into a realist outlook.
Okay.
So this BFF partners that we're talking about, right? Like they've gone through the ups and downs, man. They've reached a certain stage at this point, and they're very realistic about the world. So I don't think optimism plays a negative role in deciding where we want to invest money. But at the same time, for the new age founders, you want them to keep holding on to that optimism for that long, and VCs will just take a shit on it, right? Because that's our job. Like, so we're the opposite end of your delusional optimism. So these BFF partners actually kind of fall somewhere in the middle. I can be that horrible pessimist.
I can relate so beautifully to your point because I think that's somewhat of the journey that I have gone through. Because when we started, when we were talking to founders, no clue what things were, how things work. I don't even think we still have a clue. 0.1%.
Constant learning.
Yeah, we have like 0.1% at this point, maybe. So it is so true that you start off like, oh, this is also a great idea, that is also a great idea, that is also a great idea. And then you're like, okay, wait a second, that person, maybe not. This guy, I don't think he knows what he's talking about. And then you get that inherent bullshit meter that starts beeping in your head. The moment someone talks about one thing that is just not correct, your bullshit meter just goes ding, 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 ding. And this is us when we've been at it for not even a year. So the guys you're talking about who've been there doing this for like 8, 10, 15 years, I am sure they have a better than most bullshit meter.
That's exactly what I depend upon, right? Because I mean, I've also been doing this for a while. It's been about 8 years that I've been in the ecosystem, and yes, you're absolutely right. There's literally like a ting ting that goes in your head when someone just says something very ludicrous. But these folks are the most realistically grounded people you will meet. They've actually gotten their hands dirty and built these large companies, man. They know it's not all like beautiful and glam the way it looks on the outside. It's crap. It's daily firefighting. It is daily getting nagged on by your friends, family, co-workers, employees, literally everyone, because your life is inherently horrible. All you're thinking about is your business constantly. That is a very harrowing thing for a brain to have, and it's psychologically not very great. Right? So over time, I think everyone, successful founders at least, if you ask them, at some point of time they've realized certain things about their life and made a lot of lifestyle changes to make sure that they have the strength to keep moving forward, because it's a very, very difficult journey at the end of it. And I think people have like romanticized the shit out of it, like, oh, you can raise money left, right, center and you'll become a billionaire. Balls, man. It's the hardest thing in the world. Like, just getting out of bed every day and having to do those 20 things every single day is so difficult. And I know a bunch of founders, right? Because their startups don't go a certain way, they do fall into depression. It's a very common phenomena in the ecosystem.
The most common example that you get is that your startup is your baby.
It is.
The parents still are passive, where the person is like, the kid is doing its own thing, whereas the company is literally running because the founder is there, as you said, taking shit from all directions.
The world is changing faster than it ever has. Not on a year to year basis, on a day to day basis. Given AI, whatever it has done since December 22, the world has flipped on its head. Parents don't get that. When we talk about these founders are running their companies for, let's say, 15 years. 15 years ago, there was no iPhone, or like it was iPhone 1 or whatever.
Fair.
There were no apps, there was no tech. Tech was beginning. AI, though, forget it. When these founders come in to these new age companies, they would bring in their fundamental beliefs. How does a company dodge those fundamental beliefs? And why I say parent is because our parents don't innately understand how can you just sit and chit chat with people and like try to make money.
Exactly. Very, very simple way to do this, right? And actually, this is one of the biggest reasons that we even set up BFF. For every founder, you want to constantly stay in the loop. You don't want to become outdated or be called a dinosaur.
Can you define the loop?
Like for all of us, right? Like your parents today would, in your head, be dinosaurs because they don't understand what we're doing here, for example. However, at the same time, for an experienced founder, right, he might not understand Gen AI as well. But when he talks to a new age founder who does, there's a automatic connection that gets formed, right? Because this guy is an expert in his field and he has the humility. He will always have the humility.
Do you think that is true?
It is 100% true. I work with over 70 plus BFF partners today. These guys are the smartest people I have interacted with in my entire life. And I have never met more humble people who are constantly trying to learn what's happening in the world, constantly trying to stay up in, like they just know exactly what is going on. And that's a massive reason as to why they also want to invest in startups coming out today, right? Because they don't want to become redundant. Anything they learn from new age founders is something that can possibly be applied in their existing large businesses. Like these larger companies can very well be customers for these new age brands. So these new companies that are coming up, your lowest hanging fruit is going to be if someone's invested in you and you can be like a SaaS partner to them, or supply something to them, or some kind of software that they're giving away, a product, whatever.
I like to say India has 2-3 different kind of businesses. One is the startup,
Yes.
who is trying to walk, falling, trying to walk, falling, right? Then there is the fully established MNC, the Zomatos and the Zerodhas and like the killing it world and like profitable,
Fair.
300 crore, 500 crore, whatever the number is, right? In the middle, there are dhandas. And dhandas is buy cheap, sell high.
Yeah.
I'll buy wood, make it into MDF, sell it out, make my profit.
India is a land of like middlemen and traders.
India is a land of dhandas.
Yes.
Dhanda innately works on profit.
Correct.
Startups don't make profit for at least like a given good 5-6 years, maybe more on average, and whatever that number is. When investors come in, and if the investors are dhanda people and they don't see profit, how do you get them to value these startups? How do you get them to invest in these startups and help these startups?
See, that's actually a very difficult question. So thankfully, and there are a few parts to it, right? So if I just think about the three different buckets that you spoke about, traditional dhandas are what India is built on, right? That's how your services economy is built. The concept behind a startup is how can you do these same things using technology in a more efficient manner. So effectively and very simply speaking, what does the VC industry or like these early stage investments even mean, right? Fundamentally, their job is to give a small amount of startup capital to capable folks to be able to do what a traditional dhanda did in maybe, let's say, 3 years within 1 year. All you're doing is reducing the time frame graph, right? And that's what we mean by can it scale quickly. Every VC says this, scale quickly, or grow quickly. That's exactly what it means. So it doesn't mean that you're taking this money to blow it up, dude. It's not to get a fancy office and to drive a Merc. No. And there are enough checks and balances in place for that, right? Inherently, whatever money you are raising from external people, coming back to the child analogy, right? I'm cutting off my arm and giving it to someone else. My child's arm, that too, not even my own.
That is pretty morbid, but I'll take it.
But it's a difficult proposition to do, right? But that's literally what you're doing. You're just like, here, take the arm, take 20% of my business, it's fine. But you need it so much at that point of time because you do inherently believe that you can scale this very quickly. So I think fundamentally your traditional dhandas versus startups only differ in that equation. Second part to that would be, look, this ecosystem is only 8-10 years old, yeah. If you all think investors know everything, that's a joke. हमको नहीं आता. We're also learning, right? And market cycles do have a big role to play. It's not just us. You look at the global markets today. Why is there such a massive valuation correction in the most developed ecosystem in the world? The valley is screwed, right? Solely because a lot of companies were overvalued because of a heightened sense of optimism. And today are finally starting to see that we couldn't achieve it. It's not that there was not a growth path to it. It's just that execution matters. And if you can't execute what you say, it's just a dream.
Let's go deeper into this. Let's go deeper into what is this 1000 CR revenue and minus 2000 CR profit.
Personally, I do feel like that's bad management. But that's how ecosystems across the globe have been okay with funding loss-making revenue models for a really long time. So it became very acceptable.
I know Zomato just turned a profit.
There've been phases to the ecosystem as well, right?
Okay.
Let's go with phase one, when like this entire like startups ecosystem and all of these words even started coming into the equation. We're talking 2012, 13, around that time, right? The first wave was every Indian investor or even global investor working in India copy pasting what had been done in the US, right?
You don't think that's still happening?
I do not think so, not anymore.
Okay.
The propensity has massively changed because over the years, I think every investor has realized that India is a very unique market. And you cannot copy paste models that have worked in the US and give them similar valuations here.
And the biggest example is the subscriber model. The biggest example where so many startups have fallen flat on their face.
But they continue to happen, no? The subscriber model. Even if you look at Zepto, you look at Swiggy, you look at all of these things.
Absolutely.
They're trying to make money from their subscriber models.
Why is that? There's nothing wrong with that, but they will never be able to do it if they did it the same way that it was done in the US. US is a simpler market to build for, yeah. I'll give you a small example.
That is a very
right?
questionable
They are
statement.
doing a buy first, subscribe later, and like subscription is optional.
Please also remember, all of us sitting on this table, we do not represent India.
No, not at all.
We are like the top 0.001% with very massive exposure to different cultures, to Western ways of functioning, and our thought process and the way we operate is tinged with that. Actual India doesn't function like that. Do you know you understand what go to cart means, right? Or add to cart.
Yeah.
Right? Do you think someone in a tier 3 village in India would know what that means?
Fair enough.
It's that simple. So when you're building for a community which has people like us and has different types of people, plus given the cultural diversity, the aesthetic that is appealing to every different segment is new, language spoken is different, all of these complications are nuances that Indian businesses have to think about.
I'll throw a spanner in the works. India has a huge wealth gap.
Yes.
US has a huge wealth gap, but India also has a phenomenally large.
Every country does.
No, but India is very special in that case. The top 10% of India has a household income of 12 lakh rupees or more. Okay?
Yeah.
When you're building a business, are you building to make money? That's the first question. If you're building for a social cause, very different argument.
Correct.
If you're building for money, that top 10%, out of those top 10%, the top 1% probably owns more than 80% of all the assets of India. These are the 1,000 crore people, 5,000 crore people, the people who say rubbish numbers, the numbers which my mind cannot even think of. Kitne
Zeros hai,
haan? Those people know add to cart. Now, if you're building a business for money, that's why I say if you're copying and pasting from the US, don't you think it would still make sense?
Not necessarily, right? So those copy paste models, they work for the top 1%,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
Which is traditionally what the ecosystem has been focused on initially, right? If you think about your Zomatos, Swiggies, all of them, when they started, they were obviously catering to a 1% audience,
Mhm.
right? But that was not where they wanted to end. They did want to expand it. That was in the plan, but you have to start somewhere. Easiest to start with people like us,
Exactly.
correct?
Yes.
So that's what they did. Over time, every business grows over time. So you
Yes.
first have to crawl, then walk, and then run.
Mhm.
So they crawled that way. Then when they started walking, they started going to tier 2 cities.
Okay.
Right? Eventually, now that they're a little bit more okay with speed walking, they are expanding into other territories. Every business does have to make money. The only differential when startups, or what we call startups, is that these guys have the ability to delay that profit making if their growth trajectory and the ramp up speed of that is in tangent, right? Like, so if Zomato has been able to get to where it is because they did have to spend a lot of money in educating you and in getting you so hooked to the product that you don't go anywhere.
Okay, so let's dive into this thing called customer acquisition cost. So when we're talking about crawling to walking to running, when you want to go from crawling to flying, you go huge on customer acquisition.
Yes.
You go, you know what, I'm going to take all of this money and just throw it at the customer. You want a discount, I'll give you a bloody 100% discount, free ice cream for everybody, right? Let's talk about that. Can you break it down for the viewers what customer acquisition cost is and where that 1,000 crore revenue and 2,000 crore thing is at?
Customer acquisition cost is effectively the cost that a company spends while trying to acquire a customer, right? So I might have a certain product that I'm selling. I have to get myself in front of you. That could be through performance marketing, influencer marketing, offline retail, whatever. There are 1,000 ways for me to attract you to the product.
Bold Care has a very bold way of doing that right now.
Right? So I feel like I will spend X amount of money to ensure that you see my brand. Okay? And both of you are not going to convert, obviously. Maybe only, Vishnu decides he wants to buy, and you're like, no, I don't like it. This is not very appealing, or maybe I'll look at it later. So
Okay.
my actual customer acquisition cost is the total amount of money that I spent versus the number of people I was able to convert, right?
Okay.
So you anyways have to end up spending a lot more money and your conversions will be on the lower side.
Okay.
And when you're running a business, the optimization is exactly there. How do you
Define.
spend the least amount of money to get the most number of customers to at least start trying out or utilizing your product/service?
Okay.
Whatever money I spend, whether I get 0 people from it or whether I get thousands of people from it, right? Whatever money I spend is customer acquisition cost. And there are multiple ways to do that.
I feel we miss one very essential point on customer acquisition cost. We say we want visibility and we want use. We also want stickiness, right? And when the stickiness comes in, that's when it makes sense to spend a huge money. If my customer is acquired today for excess cost, sticks with me, then later I start making value on the customer when I'm going to be
Logically, that would be great, right? But when you're getting out there, think about it. Logically, when you're just getting yourself out there, if you don't have a lot of eyeballs, then it's very difficult to have even those initial people start to try something new. There's
Okay.
always some friction when there's something new in front of you.
So let's talk about starting versus sticking. We have another very fancy term called LTV, lifetime value of a customer.
Yes.
So can we have lifetime value and can we have its relation with customer acquisition cost?
Okay.
Very,
so
very simple terms.
very simply speaking, at an average outset for any business to do well, right, to actually make money, which is essential, I will still maintain that. The CAC or
Are you
the
sure?
amount of money.
You didn't sound very sure. You're like, you don't need to make money.
No,
Bro.
you definitely need to make money, whether it's today or 2 years down the line. But I fundamentally, and I've always believed this, that very like these 1,000 crore revenue versus 2,000 crore loss is not a good place to be. Like, you need to, at a certain stage of a company, you have to think about unit economics. And sure, you can make certain calls where you spend extra for some kind of branding, some kind of goodwill, etc. But fundamentally, you should be making profit on everything that you do. And now coming back to CAC versus LTV, very, very simply speaking, how much money a company spends on acquiring its customers should always be lesser than the amount of money their transacting customers are going to continue to give them over their lifetime. So CAC should always be lower than LTV. Basic, very simple rule to follow. If you can do that and you don't realize that on day one, let me also tell you that, right? Like, let's say we're doing this podcast today. You want to put it up on YouTube. You will need to market it so it gets to a certain kind of audience so that you have that reach, right? And maybe only 1% of people will actually end up subscribing to it, correct? But you've still spent money on it. That was your customer acquisition cost. Now, whether this person, now only 1% of them are giving you LTV, the remaining have dropped off. So, to target them again, you will have to spend that same amount of money.
So, what does a startup want to earn in the first year, in the second year, maybe later?
As much money as they can, dude. That's a very simple question.
Do you want to earn goodwill, which companies are building by spending hordes of money on advertisement, by giving you discounts, by giving you free
Initially,
stuff?
no, I don't think that's giving away that free stuff wala model worked like in the first wave.
Okay.
But now it is reducing. See, I mean, there's a lot that goes on in the world, yeah. Like when your Zomatos and Swiggy started up, there was a massive wave of Geo coming in. You know, India for the first time becoming a nation where people had access to the internet through their smartphones. So automatically the opportunity from just 100 million people suddenly increased to like thousands of crores of people that you could target. So massive opportunity, right? And we're still trying to figure out how to build for these markets. So no shit, these guys took time to learn. Because at that time when they started, they also started with just 3 people in a room, right? No different from anyone else in the world. Just 3 people in a room. They started with something, and I don't know if you all remember, but back in the day, Zomato was just a digitization menu platform, right?
Yeah.
That was their origin story. Most people don't even know that today. So there's no bad way of spending money as long as you're logical about it. You know, you think like a founder is smart about where they spend their money. I think they will eventually do well. But if you just keep spending money without getting the right ROI, return on your investment, right, which is standard for all of us. Even if you put in 5 rupees somewhere, you want it to yield some result. It's the same thing. So if a founder runs with that mentality, you might mess up once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, but like 10 times ke baad you'll figure out something that works, right? Some secret sauce that, okay, this is giving me a good like conversion ratio, like lower CAC and higher LTV. So I will double down on this. So initially for experimentation, you do need some amount of money, which is where early stage VCs, etc. come in. But I think once you find that product market fit, or what we call growth capital, right, series A and over, that okay, the market wants my product.
Can we go deeper? Growth capital, series A, these are very confusing things.
Okay, cool. So simply speaking, when you're like 3-4 people sitting in your garage and building something, or trying to build something, right? You have an idea, you might have wireframes, maybe you started tinkering around and building the product. That's typically called pre-seed. Okay, that is when you will need some money to actually build this out, and you might take some money from your mom, your dad, your chacha, your taya, your best friend, whoever has some money. Okay, and you fund your family and friends, right? FNF as it's called very popularly. So FNF is typically your go-to in your pre-seed rounds. Now that has obviously changed because the ecosystem is more structured. So you have these angel investors, as we call them, who you can approach and they give you money, right? If they like what you're building, they'll give you money at that stage. So that's a pre-seed stage. You're still trying to figure out how this works. You have an idea and an inkling, and you've maybe built like some kind of a prototype, but you still need to see how the market is responding to it. How am I going to approach the market? What is my sales strategy going to be? What should my pitch be? How much money do I end up wasting on this? What are the types of sales guys I need to hire? What are the type of product guys I need to hire? So you're still figuring all of that stuff out. Now, once you kind of start to move a little forward from there, you do need again more capital to keep experimenting. This experimenting phase lasts for a while, and it's different for everyone. I've seen companies that have experimented for 6-7 years, founders who've just been at it, right? Like, kudos to their perseverance, but karte rahenge, like they will keep tweaking, keep pivoting, keep changing things just because they still want to solve that damn problem statement they set out to. And imagine the kind of, like, man, courage it takes to realize for yourself that what I thought I was going to build is not working and still keep going.
How and when do you realize that what I thought is a problem is not a problem?
Very individualistic.
How did you decide?
For me, personal experiences. And I truly, truly do till now believe that what we're trying to solve for is massively important.
No, you call yourself a failed founder, so
We were about 4 or 5 of us, and we started an e-learning venture. This was not a coined term back then. This was 2013-14. And we were fresh out of college, didn't know how the world works, right? So we built a product that essentially used humor to teach core concepts to like K-12 children, like kindergarten to like 12th grade. We started with like 5th, 6th, 7th, right? Teaching them science, maths and all, using animated characters, jokes, play, like games, etc. to learn those core concepts. Simple problem statement. And I think all of us would have loved something like that in school. That's what we started with. However, when you actually start to like building something, right, it's difficult, like, because the most obvious thing to me at that point of time was, let's go sell to schools. But I was very naive. I didn't even know that to sell to a school, I have to give some like underhand bribes just to get in front of the decision maker.
Which school was this? Can we get this?
There were
correct?
so many. I actually went to 3 schools, and the first time I just came back very like flabbergasted. The second time I got a little bit pissed off, and the third meeting I did, I lost it. Like in the middle of that school. Like, are you bloody crazy? We're trying to offer a benefit to your students and you don't get, like, full crazy ballistic, right? But dude, you grow up and you realize that's how the world works, boss. And you can't change the world just because you want to build something. What you can do is change how you want to operate. So yeah, of course, we had to pivot. We started selling instead to B2B, like to companies, right? To their HR department. कि अपने employees को दे दो as an extra benefit. So we also had to pivot. And unfortunately, what we ended up realizing beyond a point was that scaling that business was extremely hard. You needed very heavy feet on street. We didn't have that kind of money. Like I said, we were fresh out of college, right? So we didn't have that kind of money. Massive feet on street requirement, because it's also a very fragmented market, at least back then, right? There was a massive debate because parents did not want their children to be on the screen. But at the same time, we were building something effectively which they will have to watch on a screen. So here the user or the person that you're building your product for is very different. And the person who's deciding to pay or buy that product is completely different.
We were on the train today and we were having a discussion about Cocomelon and why Cocomelon is so popular. So there was a child crying like in the front seat. And I thought that the value Cocomelon brings to their life is that if I give them Cocomelon, my kid shuts up. That's essentially it. And
Correct.
that to the parents is worth a lot of money, that my kid will shut up, right? In your case, it was my kid will be educated, but I'm already sending it to school.
Correct.
School was I'm already educating it. The parents are fine. I don't care.
Everyone has tuitions, everyone has extra things. Why should I add more screen time?
like your what the product you're building is essentially replacing something like a Dora the Explorer or something like that, where they're also teaching like very basic concept.
We were actually teaching school curriculum through these methodologies. So it was a little, I mean, and honestly, when we started, it was a little Dora-ish, and then we realized, ki, boss, no one's going to pay for this. So we tweaked it to like CBSE curriculum. So it actually went in the same, like, you know, chapter-wise, जैसे आपकी book में होता है.
I mean is that it's more than it is similar. It is taking up that time of that child. That child that will spend that time watching a cartoon.
They can spend it
Yes,
here. That
exactly.
was the pitch to the parent.
That is what.
But realistically, I think we all know that's crap. As a child, he will still watch Dora, right? So even I knew it. While I was pitching this, I myself knew that this is not the right way to do it. Effectively, I think it was a interesting learning curve, right? But eventually, I also started to realize that it's not possible for me to go and explain to every single parent why this will help your child.
So when you spend all of that effort building the curriculum, because it must have taken a whole load of time, and when you spend
It took
all
a
of
year
that,
and a half to build the base product.
and then you spend all of that energy, and not just you, like 5 other people, put your life on hold, do all of this, go to a school, get shut down. How do you deal with that? Because a lot of startups have to deal with this.
It's depressing. Like, I was literally head of business development, so it was my job. Like, any sale that happened or did not happen would be my fault. So, like, all of us, 4-5 of us, having to pay our rents or just have enough money to eat breakfast the next day was dependent on whether this sale gets made or not. The stakes are high, dude. And absolutely what you said, I have the pressure that it's not just for me. I'm responsible for these 4 other people. I have to make sure that they can pay their rent on time. So, I actually remember this quite starkly. I got out of that third school meeting like fuming, and I'm just sitting in the local and howling, right? Because I'm so frustrated with the whole day I've had. And I go back to my office and I sit down with, our founder, Deva, and I was like, dude, this is ridiculous. Like, what the hell are we going to do? This entire model fails if we can't make bulk sales. And of course, it took me some time to calm down. But then after that, when, you don't have time to sit and wallow. That's why we call it hustle, right? You have to get up and hustle. So I might cry for 15 minutes, but then I'm like, okay, what else can I do? I can't be stuck in this box that, oh, this is what I thought of, it didn't work out, so I'm just going to be stuck here. So you hustle, you figure it out. Next thing, that's how the whole idea, I went to Maruti the next day and I was like, B2B sales is something I can do. I was like, yo, HR department, can you sell to your people, please? Right? So you figure it out. Like, that's what hustle is. And that's why this term is used so, like, poignantly. It doesn't just mean some crap, man. It actually means that when you're in a hard spot, how do you move out of it? How do you keep moving?
I think that's where that pressure that you put on yourselves comes on. And I want to get back to that point that I asked you, that how do you decide to be like, "Acha, now I have hustled, I have done my bit." Where did you say, this is it? Or,
You
guys,
don't.
this is not working?
You typically don't. It's life will come and slap you 30 times, and then you're like, I don't have a choice. Not kidding. Like, seriously, like, I towards the end of it, I was constantly stressed. I was not sleeping well. I was getting migraines like 5 times in a week. It was ridiculous because you can't work 7 days a week, 24/7. Like, life is not sustainable. Even if you're just like 21, 22 years old, you can't do it, right? So, I was just like, physically, my health started to deteriorate massively. I didn't have a choice. I had to take a backseat.
So I've had this moment with a lot of people where they're like, Akhil, I have a great business idea. And then they
You don't know how much I hear that.
and then they yap on about their business idea. So I'm like, okay, let's build the firm. And then we start discussing how much will it be, how much will you make. They never thought about money. And I feel a lot of founders don't think about money. They think about the problem. And if they have the courage, they just jump into the problem without thinking what they
And
will
that's
make.
exactly what I mean by having the right network is crucial. What founders don't understand is that you have a massive opportunity cost. You're not taking, okay, you might not be drawing salary for a year, but boss, that was money. If you earn 30 lakhs in a damn year, that is how much you are effectively losing by making this decision. So no one thinks about that tangibility. That's one unfortunate truth. Having the right kind of advisors. Now, when this guy is giving all this like Gyanpatti to you and like, I will build this and I will do that, what will be your first question? How will you make money?
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah.
The fact that you ask that question will force him to have to think about it. And that's exactly why having people around you who can just steer you in that right thought direction is very, very important.
I think that's a problem with the positioning of this whole word that is founder startup. Like today we were having conversations on the train.
Yeah, They've become superheroes, man. It's a joke. It's not a superhero journey. It's quite the opposite. It is one of the most horrible ragda patti jobs you'll do in your life.
Don't you also think it's the dirt that is thrown on money? Like money is made the evil thing in a lot of situations. Me asking for money for providing value to you becomes कि यार why are you making it transactional? गलत है, तुम पैसे के बारे में क्यों सोचते हो? पैसा तो आ जाएगा. That is such a
यार ये हिंदी में बोलने के ढंग होते हैं, but at the end of the day that same person who talks like that will be minting crores in the back, right? And to his staff will be the one who doesn't give that extra 500 rupees on Diwali.
exactly that.
There are people who have told us, "Yeah, I don't want to talk about money with you because that will ruin our friendship. Here, talk to XYZ person in my company who is then going to come talk to me only."
And he's the founder of the firm. So like
That is
very clear.
so I'll give you a
where we've
small
spoken to
thing,
this
right?
person and the person has said, "Okay, I have to discuss with X, like the
Yeah.
particular founder who we are directly in touch with." And I'm like, this is just so annoying.
That is actually done more so that person can protect himself from an awkward encounter. Like if you're friends with someone, right? It becomes a little, either you're very close friends that you can give like honest, brutal, like kick you in the balls feedback, or you're like colleague friends and you don't know how to tell this person that I don't know how to take this forward or I'm not fully convinced. So they'll try to redirect it to someone else in their team, right? And if that person has an unbiased, decent viewpoint on it, then of course this person will come back to engage. But because there is an inherent bias when you know someone, it becomes very difficult to objectively think about whether that's a good decision for your business or not. So fundamentally, the people who redirect here, there, even though it is going to come back to them, they're just trying to not make things awkward.
Okay, so what I want to add is many times this becomes a process which we call SOPs, right? So let's discuss what SOPs are, how they convert into red tape, and how that becomes like sometimes it becomes a wall for the company
It does.
at scale. So let's talk about that so that the people we like to believe our guests, our audience are generally people who are trying to build companies or who will at some point in their life want to take the jump to build a company. How do we get them to avoid these red tapes and random SOPs?
Because again, adding to this, it is because we have seen people in India inherently tend towards extra red tape.
It's a lot of it is necessary at times, and I do agree a lot of it is not. See, when you're starting out, it's easy to keep a flat hierarchy, right? Flat hierarchy is something that people talk about. But when you're 4-5 people, who will be senior and junior? Right? Obviously, everyone's doing the same kind of work. So that time it works, right? But as you start to grow businesses, and I used to be a big believer because I come more from early stage, etc. So I was just like, yeah, just keep doing things, and like it'll work. Like there's no need to build processes. Only to realize that if you don't from the beginning start to build certain SOPs, certain foundational processes, as you are unable to scale because everything will start to break at that stage. So it is important to have good systems, good workflows, good processes in place, right? And any person who works on building these needs to be smart enough to know that you have to keep agility and not make everything fully concrete.
Let's go deeper. Agility and concrete. What do you mean?
So I'll give you a simple example, right? Like from my life, for example. So I have a founder who has written into me and they sent in, their deck or they're like, oh, we want to talk. Fair? Yeah? Now, what would be the fastest? I'll hop on a call. Is that possible every day?
No.
Probably not, right? Like maybe over time a lot of people reach out to me, but then I also have colleagues who want to learn, right? So for me, it's two-pronged. I want my colleagues to learn. So I'm like, okay, why don't you head this? I'm happy to join if you like, but why don't you head this? Right? So that's one reasoning. You want to build your second layer. You want to make people more capable, which is what you're doing with your graphic designer, right? Because you don't want to keep doing it yourself all the time. You want to build new things. You want to do something else. Everything requires mental bandwidth. So I think that's one reasoning. Now, another way that it can be done is they've written into me. And I'm like, हाँ अच्छा मेरे को नहीं देखना. Send it into my colleague. I'm like, तुम देख लेना आराम से और उसको reply कर देना. Technically, the two examples that I just described to you are exactly the same. But the attitude with which you do it would change.
But they're not the same. I'll tell you why. Because once the ladder starts, there are multiple steps to the ladder. When it's the founder cares the most about the company, मेरी company में सब कुछ अच्छा हो, amazing. Or if I'm handing the call to someone else, I'm making them learn. When it is the fifth person down the ladder who is handling the call for the fourth person down the ladder, that fourth person doesn't give a crap. And it's very difficult to get people who give a crap at
And that's exactly why org culture, hiring your senior management well, becomes bloody key. One person cannot run everything. It's a flow, right? So whatever this CEO feels or this founder feels about his company, it should be so clearly imbibed in his next right hands that they imbibe it forward. That is technically how an organization is supposed to run.
I'll introduce a word. It's called ESOP. Can we go into ESOPs and how ESOPs might be valuable in this discussion?
ESOPs are, okay, so breaking it down, it means employee stock option pool. So every company wants to hire the best talent out there, right? And mind you, when I say talent, there's a lot more to it. It doesn't just mean you have XYZ skill set, so you're the best fit. There has to be a cultural, fitment. There has to be the way you think needs to match. Because literally, how else will you be someone's right hand, right? So you need to be in sync, if nothing else. So I feel like ESOPs are something that companies actually carve out pehle se. They just keep it there that when I find the right person, I want them to have meaningful stake in my business. I don't just want them to be an employee who takes salary and goes home. This is not a 9 to 5 job. I want you to be invested in the growth of what we're building together. So this ESOP pool, right, this employee stock option pool is kept aside by a company, and as and when they find the correct type of talent, they want to of course bind them to the company. See, it's about aligning incentives at the end of it, right? If I give you a salary, वो तो आपके बैंक अकाउंट में हर महीने पहुंच जाएगा. You go home, you live your life. What is your incentive to build this further? But if I give you a number of shares, today they might only be worth 10 rupees. Those shares could be worth, like 20 crores in the next 4 years if you build it well. So you're just aligning incentives. I feel like ESOPs are a fantastic way to align incentives correctly for your key team members. You don't just give it to any Tom, Dick, and Harry. Again, please remember, this is a part of your baby.
Unless you're Amazon.
The caveats. But like a part of your baby you're giving away to someone because that person is actually helping you nurture that. Right? They're actually helping nurture your child. So you don't mind giving it to them. In fact, you pre-plan it that I do want people like this. Takes a village, right? So I want my village to be the best and I'm happy to give them stake in the company if they are willing to build it out with me.
Going further with the baby and parent example, is like giving the nanny a little bit of thing. Here you have this part is yours.
Why don't you live with us in the house? I'll give you extra things. In Indian culture, it's very common, right? Nanny hai ghar pe, so you'll automatically, the mother will buy her like a sari and gift it to her. Like, oh, laddu le jao, tumhare bete ka birthday hai. These are small things that even in the informal way that India runs do exist. So it's just you're just aligning incentives, man. You're both working towards building this company. If you have stake in it, automatically you're more aligned to keep at it, right? Then you have the right vision. So this top down that we're talking about, that founder's chul, to do everything perfectly and to have the best culture, etc., will automatically come in this second person also. And that's how the flow down keeps working.
So now speaking of founders chul and just doing everything perfectly, this is a thing that everyone has. कि ये है, I want to look at it so many times. No, I want this change. No, I want that change. This is a small thing. How do you guys, when you're looking at it as a company that is part of your portfolio, and they've come to you for advice, where do you temper this? Ki bhai, ho gaya. This is perfect enough.
I don't believe in perfection.
How do you temper it?
I don't think perfection exists because your definition of perfect will keep changing. So in fact, when I have founders, at least at the stage that we invest at, which is pre-seed, right, very very early, our logic is very simple: build a super basic product, go out there and figure out what the customer wants. Don't build what you think is valuable. Now go ask them.
What's the best way to do that? It's very difficult. It is not that easy to get to your customer in the first place, then be
Have
able
a
to ask
solid
them.
network.
How do you build that?
I'm telling you the hack.
How do you build that?
Building a solid network.
I am a nobody. Just I've come from Canada, landed in India. Don't
Doesn't
know
matter,
anybody.
dude.
What
You
do I
can
do?
be anywhere in the world. Like I know people sitting in the US, sitting in like London, sitting in Austria. Like doesn't matter, right? LinkedIn today makes borders seem redundant.
LinkedIn is pretty.
LinkedIn count as a good net?
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
I'm not talking about LinkedIn. So it's about building relationships at the end of it.
Mhm.
LinkedIn is just a platform, right? You might have 1,000 people on your feed.
Mhm.
But when you effectively want help with X, it also gives you the opportunity to look at 100 people who are doing X. Reach out to those 100. 2% will reply. Standard marketing rates apply, right? Like standard rules. 2% conversion, 2% of people will reply to you. At least one of them you'll vibe with. There, you just made a relationship and got something constructive out of it. The ability exists for everyone, man. It's just that people like limit themselves as to how they can do it. Like, don't have qualms about yourself. There are hundreds of mixers that happen every week. Go attend them. Why are you sitting in your shell? You want to talk to people, reach out to people in the first place. I think all of us psychologically are bound by certain restrictions, which when you get past, and mind you, most successful founders that I know are a little bit eccentric. Like these normal protocols, like, oh, I won't reach out to someone, doesn't come into their head. Like, big shit, if I don't ask, how will I know? And I think that's a great attitude to have.
So again, Hormozi has this thing where he says, we all try to be normal. And you think of the normal person, you will end up being the, forget who is normal, but when you think of your average normal person who is earning less than 12 lakh rupees a year, who is sitting somewhere in a tier 2.5, tier 3 city in India, you're like, I don't want to be that guy.
Normal people have diabetes, are overweight, don't have money, and just want free money in their life.
Yeah.
And you want to be normal, you don't want to be normal. Don't.
So that's when you realize that, hello, normal is not something I'm willing to do. Normal is not something I'm okay with. We have this conversation where the two of us are like, यार, कभी कभी ऐसा लगता है यार कि if we were happy sitting in our own town, not hustling, doing, taking the quote unquote easy route of life, wouldn't life be so much different? But the thing is, neither of us can fathom that. Like that gives me the heebie-jeebies.
It makes you, yeah, right? Everyone's wired differently, dude. Some people like that. Even for me, like if someone tells me I have to do the same thing day in, day out, I'll be like, what are you talking about? I'd rather like jump off like a 10th floor building. Thank you very much. Like that sounds bloody boring. Like it, like small, like menial admin type of jobs. I'm just like, how are you not losing it? Like try to upskill. Like how do you spend time? How do you feel productive? So everyone's wired differently that way. And yes, of course, like when I talk about like becoming great founders, they weren't great founders on day one, man. It's a learning process. Like how you grow up in life and learn certain things. It's the same. Every founder's journey is also the same.
I have a great business idea, but I will not tell it to you because you will
Steal it.
What's your
Please sign an NDA.
what's your
Sign an NDA.
I've heard that from a lot of guys.
what's your view on this sentence?
Boss, unless you build something really fantastic, don't come to me. I don't want to hear it. I'm serious, that's become my outlook now. Because I used to try to explain to people initially, ki yaar, you might have a great idea, but that same great idea has popped up in at least 1% of the population of the Earth's mind.
My response is build a teleportation machine. I have my idea, give me 5-10% of your company.
So, I mean, initially I used to be very polite when people sort of brought this up, right? And I was like, okay, like, this is why it is. Execution matters. The idea is just up in the air, right? So, it's not going to tangibly change anything. So, until you start building and build something proprietary, it's there's nothing for me to steal. So, but now I've become very blatant about it. I'm like, I don't want to hear it. Thank you.
The thing is, no, that
मेरे को
that's
सुनना
the-
ही नहीं है इतना क्या crazy idea तुम्हारा. You
That's
think
where the
Uber
mature-
only Travis Kalanick thought about or what? Balls. All of us thought about it at some point in time in our lives. There needs to be a simpler service for
काश
cab booking.
ऐप होती
बुक करने के
डालता.
लिए हाँ सबने सोचा है ना. Everyone has had that idea. It's the guy who was able to build it, man. That's what matters.
काश हर रेस्टोरेंट डिलीवर करता.
काश फोन ना करना पड़ता.
नहीं, but like forget phone. काश हर रेस्टोरेंट करता.
हाँ.
Because there were so many who didn't because they're like we
Yeah.
can't afford it.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. I think that's where the maturity of the founder comes in. That a complete newbie, zero, like complete first day in the thing. Are like, अरे मेरा idea बहुत अच्छा है. I can't share it with anyone. Two, I would say 1 month in where he's like, okay, I can share my idea with XYZ people if they give me the right vibe. 6 months in, the person sitting next to them in a metro station gets the idea because they're like, अच्छा मेरे को इसकी भी opinion चाहिए.
It's a learning curve.
I have an idea and now I'm going to start building a company. And I watch Shark Tank. Capital raise is the new buzzword. And I'm going to make a lot of money by just taking their money and pocketing a bit of it. How does a capital raise go wrong? What is hidden behind the curtains?
Capital. Okay, so there's a lot. I'll try to keep it a little censored and not say anything politically incorrect.
Go for it.
Oh, the more incorrect.
The more
better.
incorrect, more clickbaity. I'll get
So-
a nice thumbnail.
Yeah, and I'll get prosecuted. So I think, see, what can go wrong with the capital fundraise is so many things: timing, type of investors you're getting on board, what value do they add to you. I do understand that when you're building a business, you do need some amount of capital to actually experiment and build it out. Like that's a traditional journey. Even your dhanda businesses started from somewhere. उन्होंने भी कहीं से लोन लेके अपना business start किया.
Dhanda businesses to primarily always need capital.
Correct. So मतलब the first time when they would have started, उन्होंने भी किसी और से पैसे लेके start किया था.
Yes.
No two ways about it. So similarly, that's what you're doing. It's just you're doing it in a more formalized economy setup as opposed to taking it from XYZ. So what can go wrong here, right? So the common analogy for a startup and a founder is that's its baby. The common analogy that we use for a founder and the investors is that this is like your spouse. It's literally like your spouse. Think about it. You spend more time in office than you do at home when you're building a startup. You will call your investor multiple times during a day. You will reach out to them for multiple things very, very frequently, right? Effectively, you end up spending more time with this investor or talking to them more meaningfully than you do with your own spouse. Another important layer to remember, as a founder, the bad things you cannot discuss with your employees. You can't discuss with your team.
Right.
Who will you go to? You go tell your wife, she'll nag back at you. Bitch, I told you not to do this. This is wasting money. Right? Mummy, Papa will say the same thing. Bola tha na, job karo. Who will you go to? Your only person is your investor. That's why co-founders are important. That's also the takeaway. But at that stage, your investor is your sounding board as well, man. And if that person's advice is only not sound, you'll be blown out of the water. So I think the biggest problem that I have seen with fundraisers, which I would point out, one is the timing of it. If you raise money too early or too late, you missed out some chance, right? And the second most important is not getting the right kind of investors on it.
Too early,
At-
too late. Can we have a deeper
Too
understanding?
early, too late. So there are companies which end up raising a lot of money with absolutely no direction of what they're going to build. That money will blow up real fast, right? And maybe the market will go down. You won't be able to raise your next round. Company band. Investors have lost all their money. Pretty common practice you must have heard of, especially when we're in like bull cycles, right? Flip side, too late. You've built like full profit making dhanda and now you're going to try and raise funds. आपको scale तो आता ही नहीं है boss.
Yeah, get a 10
आपको तो धंधा आता है.
Yeah.
But you don't know how to scale this at 10x the speed. That's not something you focused on. So you don't know how to do it. If you go out to raise money at that time, you'll get not a great valuation. Then you might as well keep running it the way you are. Giving away 20% of your baby, not a small thing. So you have to be cognizant of why you are doing it. And that is something most people forget. Oh, paisa aa raha hai, utha lo. No, dude. Money is abundant. If you don't raise from the right kind of people who cannot support you and help you build this forward, it has no value. पैसे तो फिर तुम बैंक से उठा लेते, डेट उठाते ना.
Let's go debt versus equity. I have it right here.
Okay, so firm believer in utilizing debt for certain types of things. Equity should only be raised for the value that these extra shareholders bring onto your cap table.
Do you wish to be the SoftBank of the world? Of India?
In the
Bharat?
early stage, yes, sure, I would love to. But growth, unfortunately, is not my strong suit, so I don't go there. Everyone, I mean, it's also important to realize what your limitations are, right? I understand early stage well because I've done the 0 to 1, 1 to 10 myself. So I get that journey. But I don't know the 10 to 100, so I'm not the right person to invest there.
But Sarah, if you had to say that this is cap, this is equity, this is debt. If your company is 1, 2, 3 equity, your company is 5, 6, 7 debt.
It's very difficult to distinguish that because honestly, when you think about optimal structuring, right, optimal capital structuring for a company, it is most likely going to be a mix of both. If you are going to raise 2 crores of rupees in equity just to finance your inventory, I think that's stupid. Just raise debt. But if you want to get like these 3 specific people on board who are going to help you crack your marketing growth and your branding channels, for example, right? Or they're going to help you get like fantastic manufacturing connects, which will make your supply chain so optimal that your margins will increase by 20%. I'm happy to give a part of my child to that person.
I would rather give a part of my child.
There you go.
Yeah, because
So value.
if they are giving me debt, they don't really care much.
Exactly.
Again, goes
value.
back to skin in the
Value
game.
versus
Skin in the game, yeah.
value versus like utility are 2 different concepts. As soon as you understand that, utility can be serviced by debt in most situations. Value cannot. Value has to come from equity.
Debt comes along with another word, which is death. So debt is the only way that your company goes under. Very difficult for a company to go under with equity. Don't you think so?
That's actually not true at all.
Okay.
Like there's literally a coined term, we call it the death valley, right?
Okay.
In startups. Like there's a death valley you go through. If you cross that, then you're fine. But if you don't, you're dead.
Can you define it?
70%, more than that probably, 70% of startups don't last beyond the first 3 years of their existence. Maybe 90% actually now.
Why?
Why? Because it's a difficult journey. That's what I've been saying. People
let's-
think it's so...
Let's put some numbers. Why? Is it because they don't make money? Because they don't sell? Because they don't have interest expenses? If I were to have that and an interest expense, that would be a fixed cost.
You still have expenses, right?
Okay, what kind?
You might have raised money. Money is money at the end of it. Once it's on your books, what you do with it matters.
Okay.
Right? Whether it's debt or equity doesn't matter. Debt maybe you'll only go to debt if your business doesn't work.
Yes.
Same thing with equity. If my business doesn't work, this holds no value.
Debt may, if my business doesn't work well enough to service its interest expense. Equity may, if my business doesn't work at all. Won't you say so?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Let's say you make, so interest ka in your debt side you've covered. On the equity side, you make some money, but not a great amount of money. You'll never be able to raise your next round. You'll automatically stagnate. And this money that you had raised in your first round is not it's not abundant. It's not going to never finish. At some stage, you will need to have your next growth curve, right? Also, at this stage, please understand you have external shareholders that you are responsible for.
What does that mean? It's said a lot. You have external shareholders you are responsible for. What responsibility do you have?
It's a fiduciary responsibility. They gave you money when you had no one else to pick it up from, to build an idea. They don't know you from Tom, Dick or Harry, right? So they just think that you are the right person to do something and you have the capability to build something good.
I should be nice enough to give them their money back?
Not necessarily, man. I think there is some amount of transactional relevance here, right?
Okay.
And like I said, your investors are kind of like your spouse. So it's not limited to a very like, I should be nice to you. It's actually that I gave you money and I actually have legal rights to take that money back.
Do they?
You can, why not? Exit and drag are the most common rights that investors ask for to protect their ability to get that money back. So every company has a certain period that they are given, okay, after which the company is liable to give the investor an exit.
Okay.
Okay. Now we do not obviously define what amount that exit will be at, because that's impossible to know. Like 5 years later, I don't know where your company is going to be. But typically at pre-seed or seed stage, an average timeline of 5 years is the exit period. So I give you money today. After 5 years, you need to find me an exit. Okay. What does that mean? You can IPO, you can have a potential M&A, you can be earning so much cash that you're able to buy me out, right? Multiple different ways that you can do this. But effectively, when we get into transactions, etc., there's proper legal documentation that is done. Money is not just given. I'm not giving you 5 rupees here.
Can you define the minimum value in your exit?
Unfortunately,
You cannot,
no.
because it's the risk that the investor takes on the founder, right?
I will explain. So all investors that come in, they ask for liquidation preference.
Okay.
Okay.
What is that?
Liquidation preference essentially means that anytime the company as a whole sees any kind of liquidity event, the first priority of that money being given out is to the investor. As a founder, you won't get shit until your investors make at least 1x of their investment amount.
Can you put that in? At
It
least
is
1x?
there. A standard liquidation preference right is classified as such. It is the higher of 1x of the subscription amount plus all unpaid dividend, or the final pro rata amount that is available to be distributed amongst people in that same class. So if there are 5 investors और इतना पैसा नहीं है कि सबका 1x वापस कर दो, फिर जितना भी है उसका 1/5 1/5 will go to everyone. Founder gets fuck all.
You spoke about unpaid dividend. How do you define that?
Very high level, simple चीज होती है. Any time that you are a shareholder in a company, basic, right? Public markets also is the same thing. You're a shareholder in the company, you earn some percentage of that company. The company gives you dividends. What is dividends? It's that percentage of their profit.
Is it mandatory in India to pay dividends?
It is a shareholder right, yes. It's not mandatory for a company to pay it, but it is mandatory as a shareholder right. So I might not take it year on year, but when I'm exiting, I would like it. So it's up to me to choose when I want to take that dividend. But yes, as a company, you are liable to pay dividends to your shareholders.
Sarah, who are you? Why do you care?
I was a person who by chance stumbled into the startup ecosystem just because, like I said, I did not like the Indian education system, etc. It was just a random problem that I really, really wanted to solve. And through the course of years and time and learnings and the number of people that you speak to and the fantastic experiences that you have, I started to realize that there's a lot more capability to be built here, right? We were just starting out, man. And it's been a very interesting journey, to be honest. So I think from a very clueless person who did not know what they wanted to do in life, this felt like home. Right? All the craziness, the chaos, the unstructure.
It is the shittiest job you will ever do. It will be this, it will
and
be
I
that.
love it.
And it is home.
I love it. Exactly. It is horrible for some people. Someone who likes to do a typical 9 to 5 will hate this. They will be like, what is this bakwas?
No job security, 7 days a week, spending more
No
in office than
time,
you
no
do at
nothing.
home.
Oh,
Nothing, no guarantee.
constant stress.
And the world against
Guaranteed
you.
early hair loss.
Happening.
Whitings already. Yeah.
Man, the world is
But-
against you. The world believes the job is better.
Is
But
that the beauty of, they say when you find your passion, you don't work a day in your life and all that jazz that people spew, and you think, what is this nonsense?
Bakwas.
And
Huh.
then you.
It feels like that on some days, but definitely not every day.
But my point is that it should feel like that, and the way I think all three of us relate to whatever we're doing is when you say it's home. When you get there, it's that okay. Yes, you are going to hate it from time to time, but the thing is, would you rather be doing something else?
I actually did think about that. Funnily enough, when I turned 25, I had like a little quarter life crisis. And I got all into like, oh, you know what? I should probably start doing something in the social development sector. I want to make more of an impact. And I started interviewing at a bunch of NGOs and, spoke to a lot of like startups also that were working in that conflux of like tech and like social good. And I still remember, I think this was a company called Social Cops, and they were doing fantastic work. I was very fascinated by what they were building. And they had one of the most rigorous like hiring processes. Like you had to go work out of their office for 2 days and whatnot. Yeah. Who does that? I was very fascinated. Everything was done. And I had a final formality interview with like the other co-founder who used to handle tech. I had nothing to do with that division, right? So just like go chit chat with him. Okay. And I was sitting across the table from this guy and we're just talking, right? Very casual conversation. And he's like, why are you thinking about leaving like the VC space, which is one of the most exclusive industries in the world, to come and join a small little startup? And I was like, because I want to make more of an impact in my life. I want to do something more tangibly good for society and for the world. And he just sat there and he looked me straight in the eye, like deadpan face, right? And he was just like, aren't you already doing that? And I was like, I was a little taken aback. And then he breaks it down. He's like, dude, you're actually like helping like early stage startups build out fantastic things. I mean, rather than the impact that me as one company will be able to make, you're helping tens of those. So I was like, okay. And sometimes you just need like a smack from outside to like for it to hit home. And it was like a tongue in my head. I'm like, yeah, he's not wrong. Funnily enough, right? I love how life works sometimes. In that same week, I had two founders that I had not spoken to in 6 months and 9 months, respectively, reach out to me in that same week. Both have called me and told me what you told us at that point in time. I wish we would have listened to it. Because one guy said, I'm having to do it now. The other guy said, if I'd done it at that time, my business would not be in such a shit show. And I realized that today. Great, like, gyan, and not just like bakchodi gyan, but like real world experience that they could now share with founders who wanted to build. And probably rather than that new founder making 10 mistakes, he would only make 3 because this guy's already told you don't do these 7 things, right? So, knowledge transfer is what we set out to solve for. How it made sense for this person is clear for the new founder. How it makes sense for these BFF partners also we've covered. It helps them stay in the loop, keeps them relevant. They want to give back to the ecosystem, all of it aligns. How does it make sense for me? I'm just sitting here in a little box coordinating with these two people. How does it make sense for me? And that's why we call it a reimagined way of an angel network, because we said, okay, fine, we'll raise our own fund, and we are a structured institutional venture capital fund, right? So we raise money from other people, other LPs, HNIs, etc., right? Raised money from them in our own fund. And then we said, okay, fine, wherever you guys will invest, I'll invest behind you. Essentially, what did I do? I built a traditional VC fund. The only thing I did differently was I outsourced the decision making process to a bunch of folks that I think are far more capable than I will ever be. What does that do for me? De-risk the shit out of my portfolio.
Has it been able to? Have you been able to drive returns?
Yeah, I mean, not yet. I mean, we only launched about 2 years ago, so very, very early to say, of course. But it has been surprising. A lot of our companies have gone on to already raise like Series A. I was like, what? And the market is shit right now. So I was like, okay, some of them are doing really well. Of course, a lot of them have failed and shut down as well. Those are statistics that you play with. That's fine. But this was exactly the idea, right? You back as many people as possible. And with every failure and with every success, we learn something constantly.
How can somebody reach you? How can somebody become a part of your portfolio or how can somebody get to these amazing people who might be able to invest
Best
in them?
way to reach out to us, if you know any one of our partners, please get a warm intro through them. It'll go a very, very long way. Otherwise, of course, you can reach out to us generally on through our website or through LinkedIn, etc. And if we think there's any fitment for us there, the team obviously will reach out.
Guys, you heard it here. Get a warm intro from us.
How does
Right
someone
here.
become
Yeah,
an LP?
you can.
How does someone become an LP?
How does someone become an LP? It's slightly more complicated. Unfortunately, we don't take money from Indian investors. So if you have money outside, you could potentially become an LP.
Yeah, reroute it to Dubai, get it to our.
No rerouting business. Like the source of capital has to be foreign. And that's another thing that, like, because we were structured offshore and not in India. And obviously, as you may imagine, a lot of companies that we invest in are India structured. So if I have taken India sourced money to the UK or Mauritius or US or wherever I'm structured or wherever any fund is structured, and then you bring it back into India, it's called round tripping. And the company in India that you've invested in will come under purview. You are to an offshore entity, what will the Indian government do to you? But these guys will get screwed. So round tripping is not allowed. So just automatically from the get-go, when we were planning and figuring out structuring, we decided that we will not take any India money. Restricted us massively and killed our chances of actually being able to raise any substantial amounts. But like I said, right, fundamentally, we were very conscious that no problem should ever be put onto a portfolio company because of some stupid compliance fuck up that you made.
So we have a tradition on the podcast where the previous guests have left you a question. Please answer that and then leave a question for the next guest. So the question for you is, it's lonely at the top. How do you manage to motivate yourself to keep at it?
I actually have a slightly different perspective. I don't think it's lonely at all. I think there are a lot of people that you can seek out who could be fantastic supporting barriers for you, right? And it could just be like work colleagues, people that you end up meeting, interacting with. If you're a founder, you have other founders, go and seek them out, man. Their problems are the same as what you're facing. And just having someone who can empathize with what you're going through is sometimes a lot of support that you just need. So I don't think it's very, very lonely. It's as lonely as you make it out to be.
I have one more question for you. What is your mantra to deal with setbacks?
I will vent for the first 15 minutes, scream, shout, go absolutely ballistic. Then for 10 minutes, I'll just sit there with my head in the hands. And then after for 5 minutes, I'll take like deep breaths and I'll be like, okay, now let's solve it.